Welcome today to the Thriving in the Decade of Disruption webinar that we've started here at the University of Queensland Business School. It's been a really good series. We've had a lot of uptake, a lot more people are tuning in live, and even a lot more people are coming and watching these things by YouTube at a later point. So really, I guess the whole point of this series is understanding that everything has changed. I mean, this word pivot, which was, I guess, an exclusive word used by us entrepreneurs and academics and consultants, really. The word pivot seems to have has become part of our modern lexicon. It really is a description of how this is going. You know, churches are pivoting, charities are pivoting, cafes are pivoting, everyone's pivoting, and universities. I'm not sure that they have sort of tried to pivot, and I think there's some very big pivots coming up because everything's changed, and so this idea around thriving in the decade of disruption really comes through from the ability to be able to understand what's going on around you, and then to change with speed and velocity and agility, I guess. So we're getting some really good feedback about the series, which is great. Talking to people who are entrepreneurs or innovators. Really pleased today to have Ran, who's got a couple of different hats on, and I'll let him talk to them a little bit more. He works as the entrepreneur residence in the University of Queensland's Ventures program, which helps students primarily start companies. University of Queensland's got a huge investment in trying to do that. But he's also the CEO of a company, a Haystack company, which is doing some really cool stuff. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation as we unpack a few things. And I guess one of the key things we want to talk about today is this idea about creating something new or being a fast follower. So we know that first to market can be a great strategy, but we also know that old sort of story that says it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. And so Rand's done some really cool things with his startup called Haystack. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what he's learned in that journey, and then we're going to sort of talk a little bit about how is he managing that, because Rand's similar to me, he's got a whole heap of different hats on. Helping students, and people at the University of Queensland start companies, but he's also still running his own company. So we're going to talk about that sort of transition of what does he see with new entrepreneurs coming through, and then we might also talk a little bit about how do you juggle multiple things, because what we're finding is a lot of people are having to keep a number of different jobs going and a number of different sort of side hustles happening. So with that, Ran, welcome to Thriving Through the Decade of Disruption and the UQ Business School podcast. Or webinar, whatever it is. Just interested, maybe if you talk us to this idea of how you got into Haystack, and this just maybe reflect on this question around being a trailblazer versus being a fast follower, and tell us how that fits into the context of what you've experienced in the Haystack journey.
Not a problem. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the program. I'm really happy to be here. And how did we get into Haystack? It's funny. The first thing I'll start probably with saying what Haystack is and what we're solving. And there are 2 million trees that get cut down every year around the world just to print paper business cards, which most of them are never being used, and even the ones that are used are actually never ending up in anyone's contact details. So it's a huge wastage of 2 million trees every year, and about $3 billion that is being spent on that. And we've started Haystack to give a digital solution that is more effective, but also can reduce that wastage quite a bit. And later, as in from this year and after and following the fires we had at the end of last year in Australia, we're not only trying to reduce the use of trees, we actually, for every paid user we have, we also go and plant a tree every year with the aim of offsetting the entire industry going forward. So this is kind of what we're trying to do. But the question is, how did it even start? If you're happy for me to kind of elaborate and say, how did we end up solving this problem? So I have 2 younger brothers, and they're the smarter brothers. They're the software engineers. They're the ones that actually can write code and solve problems. And I live in Australia. One of them at the time lived in the UK and another one in Israel. And we used to have weekly Skype catch-ups between the three of us, just talking about whatever brothers talk. But one of the conversations ended up talking about the connection between physical customers and digital followers. That was the very beginning of, liking businesses on Facebook and checking into, I think it was Foursquare back in the day, and all of those different things. And we were trying to kind of think about that disconnect to say a business knows its digital followers and a business meets their physical customers buying their products at a store. But there is a bit of a disconnect, at least there was at that time. There was a bit of a disconnect between the two, and you don't know when one is also the other. And again, today it's been solved very, very well by the biggest companies, but that was kind of what started us in putting a few lines of code together. We didn't plan to start a business. It wasn't any kind of a plan like that, but we did put some lines of code together. We do have a family business. We did have a family business back at the time. So we kind of like wrote a few lines of code. Maybe it could help that business. When we had a few lines, we were actually curious what it would be like to put an app on the App Store. So we're like, you know what, let's just put one up there. Not planning to do anything with it other than the curiosity. But then suddenly we had 25,000 people downloading the app. So that really surprised us. But what surprised us even more is that some of them were actually avid users of it. And we're like, we don't know what this is for. What exactly are they using this for? And that was the first thing that we're like, hang on a minute. And this is where we actually went and reached out to 80 people of those people that were avid users. And literally one of my brothers and I, we flew around the world and had face-to-face half-hour coffee catch-ups with 80 of those users. We literally reach out to them and one-on-one, unstructured, you're using our app, can you tell us a little bit more? And from that, I think these conversations were really the first conversations that kind of, most of them were owners of micro businesses, and they use it as a form of a digital business card. Even though we never thought about a digital business card at that point, but that was their words. And for each one of them, there was a very strong reason why the paper card just did not do it for them, right? But they were very much edge cases. So they were like, look, this is great. I would be very upset if you close the service. And these are the reasons why I cannot use a paper business card for whatever reason that was. And that started the thinking process and say, hey, let's look into and research into this whole digital business card. Who's having that problem? We get it at its micro businesses, but what about larger businesses? What about large enterprise? What about global companies? What are the trends? And that kind of started a whole research into that space to realize that there is a problem there, emerging problem that needs to be solved. And then it was in 2014 that we started the company, realizing that the trend is everything in our wallets is being digitized, and the big companies are trying to get the big prize, which is the money and the credit cards. But there are also other stuff. We have loyalty cards in there. We have business cards in there. We have receipts in there. We have all of those different things that sit in our wallet. But once our wallet is digitized, all of those will need to find a digital home. And this is where we decided to tackle the issue of digital business cards. So that's kind of how we started.
Look, that's really interesting, Ran. And what I love about that is this idea of just starting and doing something and just seeing what the response is. That's the ultimate. Obviously before the time, but that's the ultimate MVP, where you just put something in the marketplace and just see what happens. And we talked. I've had a couple of conversations with other speakers around this idea of how do you know that you've got product market fit. Jim Kalakarinas, who's a Brisbane angel investor, talked about it. When people are just embracing your idea, when they're actually just buying it, when they're taking, when you're running out of stock, when you can actually see that the signs of it pretty quickly. it's actually not like walking through quicksand. It's sort of like it's like you're on a skateboard and things are happening faster than you know what to do with. That's a sign of product market fit. So in many ways, it happens somewhat serendipitously or accidentally. I mean, you obviously did something which I think is really interesting. So you've got to that point where you've stumbled across a problem. You've looked at that problem and think, well, this seems like a problem that a lot of people have got. We've come up with a solution which we think solves that problem. Talk us about the process you did in terms of making that decision to say, well, look, we think this is actually a company. We actually think there's something behind this. You've got 25,000 downloads is pretty cool, but I mean, the market, the ultimate market's a lot bigger than that. So how did you sort of go through that process of understanding, is there competitors? Because we want to talk about this idea of being a trailblazer versus being a fast follower. So how did you understand, the landscape of who was in that market and did you have a clear pathway to actually go ahead and really create something that was going to be sustainable and scalable?
Yeah, so look, product market fit is absolute key, and it's absolute key to find it early. And I see a lot of young entrepreneurs starting with a solution and then looking for a problem that solution would fix, and that makes it a bit of a problem. It's much better to kind of look around for the problem and then find the best solution for it. But in terms of what we've done from there, so we identified that there is this problem, and this is when we went to really do some market research. So we said, okay, we identified this problem, but it cannot be, I mean, the chances of, and I agree with you, it is creating a market. So by definition, it is a trailblazer solution. So we, and all the inconveniences and opportunities that come along with trailblazing solutions. But also the chances of, us or anyone else to, when you identify a problem, to think that we were the first ones to notice this problem and the first ones to tackle it is a little bit like, the chances of that is probably the chances of winning the lottery. So we went around and we said, who else has been working on this? And who else is suffering from it? Because one of the things we've done straight away, we went to interview people that print paper business cards for large companies, because I was really interested. We said, okay, now we get it at small, medium businesses, they have this problem, and this problem is only going to get greater as time goes past. But what about the large end of town? Because if they don't shift over, the small, medium would normally follow what these guys are doing, or they normally in sync with each other. One might go first and the other. We went to, and we actually I interviewed a CEO of a company that they specifically print paper business cards for global companies. So they are the exclusive business card printer for Intel, for example. So they make sure for Intel that the Intel blue on every Intel card anywhere around the world is exactly the same shade of blue, and it gets delivered around the world. And they have these kind of big clients printing paper business cards for them. And we went through the challenges, and I think it was that conversation more than all the other conversations and research. And I really encourage people, when you look into solving problems, go and speak to people. I mean, there is obviously a lot of research done online, but speaking to people, you always find these insights that are never in any textbook. And it was that conversation that we realized there is a massive shift here. It's not just the digital wallet anymore, because businesses are moving to more transient workplace where they have more hot desking and they have more flexible work arrangements. And I'm talking about 2013 that we had these conversations, and we realized that, large businesses in the future will more and more agree for employees to work from anywhere. And now after COVID-19, it kind of accelerated it, right? So, but that is something that we've documented in 2013 from that conversation. We came out when we said, whoa, we have two different trends here. They come from two different directions. This is going to be big. So, and this is where we realize it's a big problem. It is worth looking into. And also the trend of it is only going to get bigger. And the next step for us was saying, okay, who else is currently or has tried to solve it? And this is where we were surprised with how many different companies we found. And I think, Cameron, I have one slide there for you if you want to share it with people, because that slide is literally coming out of our very, very first draft deck to potential early investors very early on, which was basically us doing research. Who else is there? And we basically mapped all of those, and we found a lot. On this one, it's only the more obvious ones, but behind each one of those, there were more. So I think we definitely found more than 50, maybe close to 100 different solutions. I think it's coming up. And on this slide, we actually plotted them. Who are they? And what year did they start working on this problem? And again, you see Facebook there. It's not that Facebook started in 2010, but Facebook in 2010 started working specifically on, this is one of the problems that they were trying to tackle. You can see Microsoft started before them. You can see LinkedIn is there. You can see Google is there. You can see all of those big companies are there, but also lots and lots of startups. And all of those were working on solving that problem from, not all of them were direct competitors, but they were all trying to solve that problem. And it's really important, by the way, as a word of advice for people thinking, in the early stage, when you do that research, don't look for people that are solving the problem exactly the way you do. Just think of the problem and the potential solutions, because very rarely do you find customers sitting in a dark corner crying, waiting for a solution to come. They do have alternatives that they use until you come up with your solution. So plenty of companies, and you could see that from the trend of these years, it was getting, we had more and more people in that field recognizing that that's a problem worth solving. So that was kind of the early groundwork that we've done to kickstart all of that.
And look, I think it's really important to understand that the problem that you're solving is not unique. You may not be the first to see that problem. So there is this interaction between having a real understanding and developing, I guess, the pathology of that problem, really understanding, well, what are the unique elements of that problem that maybe no one else has seen before, and then combining that with some form of innovative solution. So where did that go from 2013 when you really started to develop some pathology or some empathy with that problem? How did you then know how to do something different to what everyone else was trying to do with that solution? Where does that innovative solution come that gave you the advantage over the LinkedIn's and the printing companies and everyone else who was either feeling the pain of that problem or saw the opportunity? Where did you guys go and find that solution?
Yeah, that's exactly where we focused next, right? So as soon as we found all of those, the next thing was, okay, we can learn a lot from these companies, because we just give people the benefit that we just assume that the people working on these problems are as clever as us. So we want to learn from what they've already done. And all of those companies, when we researched them, we divided them into two different types of solutions. They all came into, you're either one of group A or group B in the way they solved it. So group A were all these companies that, they created a digital business card that is as smart as you would expect it to be. It's dynamic, so it updates, it has social media, it has photos, it has videos, it has amazing user interaction. So they were fantastic, but they had one little problem. They just if you use them, the user you can only share them with other people that have the exact same app on their phone. So there was a big trade-off there to say, hey, I have this amazing smart card, but I can only share it with almost anyone. Because most people I meet, it's really odd to meet someone and say, hey, I know you don't know me yet, and I know you just gave me a card, but for me to give you my card, how about we go to the App Store and start downloading apps, and you create an account and agree to terms and conditions, and then I can give you my card. So that was group A. So you have a great card, but you cannot share it with anyone. And then group B used the old standard called the V card, which is kind of an old standard that can share contact details with one another. Still not perfect, because it only works in about 70% of the cases. but at least it works in the majority of cases. The problem of that vCard, because it's such an old standard, I think from the late 80s or so, it actually has none of the smarts that you would expect. So it actually is, when you use a vCard as your baseline technology, your digital card is no smarter than the paper card you're replacing. So you cannot update it, you cannot track it, you cannot have any social, you cannot have photos and videos and all of those things. And so it didn't give. So if you're asking people to change their habits, and we will talk about, you know, trailblazing and the need to change people's habits, which is the key challenge that we face every day. There is not a lot of motivation to do it because they get basically the exact same thing, but they can only share it with 70% of the people, and they need to change a habit. And the question is, what for? So you either had this smart card you can share with no one, or this card that is not very smart at all that you can share with people, but you know, you may as well stay with the paper. So when we saw that, we said we got to solve that trade-off between deliverability and functionality. And what made Haystack unique in our solution that was that from the very beginning we said we got to solve this trade-off. The card, and that was a design requirement that I was Haystack's first user, and I need the ability to share my card with absolutely anyone with an internet connection. That was the absolute key requirement, and we basically built a smart card that has all the bells and whistles that the other cards had, that Group A had, but with the ability to deliver it not to 70% of people, but to 100% of people, very close to 100% of people. So basically anyone with an internet connected device can use it, and we maintain that to today. And that thinking of solving that trade-off is what made now Haystack the absolute largest digital business card platform in the world, and working with, and our clients are some of the biggest brands around the world that are using us, is because we came up, broke that trade-off, and we were the first ones to do it. Now there are a few copycats and a few different things that, you know, so any new service that, and every week we find a new service that is trying to get into the space now. But they're all taking our approach because this is definitely the approach that seems to have taken most of the users.
Yeah, look, that's really fascinating, and I think, Rand, and you alluded to this, that the challenge with being first is that you get these very hungry early adopters who just love it, and they think, yeah, where have you been all my life? They give you a big hug and they say, oh, you know, and they might tell a few of their friends. But in many cases, and I had another discussion with Michael Fox, who started Shoes of Prey, and these, you know, designer shoes, which you could design your own shoe and they could get it built bespoke. That was great, but it only ever got to the people who really were closet designers of shoes, and they couldn't get into that mass market, that early majority and late majority. So because to do that, and Michael Fox made this point, is to do that, you've actually got to change human behavior, which is really hard. Really, really hard. So in some senses, the advantage of changing has to profoundly exceed the disadvantage of the status quo, because people are typically lazy and they just want to keep doing what they've always done. So how have you addressed that issue, given that, you know, you've solved the technical problem, you've got a whole heap of people who loved it, and I suspect you probably still are, but because, I mean, I still use a business card. A lot of people still use business cards. So there is this nexus of trying to jump the chasm between early adopter and innovator and early majority. How have you gone about that? And maybe, you know, what advice do you have for other people who are trying to do that?
The first thing, and this is absolutely right, the first thing is to acknowledge that is going to be the number one challenge you are going to face and your customers are going to face. No doubt about that. So as you alluded to, these early adopters, those people that were looking for that, this is amazing for them. So for, you know, those micro businesses, you know, the ones that are only a team of 1 to 3 people, that is great because they kind of get it and it's like, this is the most amazing thing I've seen. And then they go and get anyone around them to use it. and that's great. But when we open up, and now we do most of our work with large enterprise, and large enterprise, we do implementations with companies with thousands, tens of thousands of employees. And this is where human behavior comes into play, because the fact that the communications team is really keen about that doesn't mean that the salespeople are going to use it. And even some salespeople are going to use it. What about the rest of them? Because you need to now convince a sales team of about 5,000 people all of a sudden to change their habit. And that is definitely a challenge. We learned it the hard way, trying to onboard early on a few years back some bigger companies and not realizing that and not addressing it. And then, we see the usage is not, there are a few people that get onto it, but the majority is not. But then as we learned it, we actually built it into a competitive advantage, because we realized that actually our motivated large customers, they want to change, they want to implement the change, and they want to implement it successfully, because it doesn't look very good on them if they spent all this money and effort on something that didn't work out. So we switched the conversation, and we've built capability based on our knowledge and our experience. We built the capability around changing user behavior, and we created an entire onboarding and communication process that we are very, very strict on, that we've built it with, that we work with internal communications team in our clients to build internal comms, whether it's on their intranet or internal emails, and it includes video tutorials and knowledge-based articles and a lot of activities that help the client do a successful change of habit. So, and by the way, we've done a lot of research in that. So a great book, if you want to read about consumer behavior, is Nir Eyal from Stanford University wrote this book called Hooked. So absolute must for anyone that wants to understand how to, this is Hooked is all about, getting consumers hooked on your digital products. So very fascinating book, and he has a lot of blogs that are interesting. So definitely worthwhile checking it out. But beyond that, we used our experience to build an entire approach to it, to a point that once we optimize it, that we saw that we get north of 90% conversion rate and success rate. That became a competitive advantage, because we are the only ones now that with large companies know how to do a successful migration of the user behavior. And that became a competitive advantage for us that is definitely helping us in the market. And it also that, return on investment for these companies, we definitely report through the analytics. We show them the type of participation and everything. So it really made a big difference for us to actually tackle that head on and make it, instead of the biggest problem, the biggest competitive advantage that we have doing it with companies.
Yeah, look, I hadn't heard that whole story. That's really fascinating, because what we talk about is in innovation and in trying to start new companies is you have an idea of a problem, and then you have an idea of a solution. You put that two things together, and it works at some level. But usually what happens is as you start to execute, you come across bigger problems or different problems. And this is why some people get so hung up on their original idea, and that they're just so precious and protective and secret about their idea. But in reality, the real value, the real unlock happens when you actually start executing and you realize that's actually not the problem. The problem is not the first problem we understood. The problem is actually deeper than that. And so what you've just told us is a great example of how you discovered a different problem, which was actually the human behavior. And so your IP, so to speak, your trade secret know-how is really about solving the human behavior problem, not the core value proposition is the digital business card, because that's easy to replicate. But actually trying to change human behavior, once now you understand how to solve that, that's actually where the value is, and that's where your competitive advantage is. So that's an excellent story.
It is. Yeah, and look, it is knowing your customers, because this came about as part of us targeting specifically large enterprise. We realized that we definitely can deliver better value there. We have, because this is an enterprise grade solution, we needed to comply with privacy legislation around the world and with cybersecurity requirements of large companies and system integration, so integrating into the CRMs and integrating into HR systems and all of those kind of things to automate and to make that a scalable solution that we can roll out with large companies. And again, it's all about knowing your customers. So something that I make sure, even though I have support team that answers all of the support and everything, I definitely, one of the things I do, I schedule time every week that I go on and answer support calls and on the support and do all of the things that that I actually speak and interact directly with our customers, because these problems and these tweaks, you know, product market fit is not a point in time. It's a journey. And the more you grow, the more you want to do a product market fit to a bigger market. And for a bigger market, you do need to better understand the problem, to better understand what your customers value, and be able to respond to that. So absolutely key to discussing it with them.
And I think that's fascinating, because in reality, sometimes the word product in product market fit, we can be lured into this false sense of security that this is just this product and the product is it. Whereas in reality, it's actually more business model fit, because it's not just around the actual product, you know, the actual widget. It's in some ways, it's all the other elements, which is how do you get it to the customer? How do you know, what's the channel? What's the way that you keep and grow those customers? Who are you partnering with? So that's really where, you know, the whole business model canvas and understanding your innovative business model, you know, makes, you know, the product is really just an embodiment of all of those things. And you don't discover those things until you start executing. And so really that's the beauty of that system. So just I want to finish off on Ran on one point, because it's not often I get to speak with someone who's got a fairly similar life than I do. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur in residence and academic at the business school. I run a consulting business and I'm also CEO of a startup company. You know, so I was talking with my wife this morning, and I've got 3 different hats and 3 different jobs, and it sounds like you've got a few different hats and jobs. Do you see that, you know, in terms of talking to potential entrepreneurs, do you see that as being a way of the future in terms of maybe not just having the one job, and maybe you've got a side hustle, maybe you've got 1 or 2 side hustles. Now that you're working with students and entrepreneurs a lot, do you see that as a way of the future with rather than just being, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got an idea, you quit your job and you start a company and that's all you do. How do you see that playing out over the next sort of period of time?
Yeah, look, the future of the employment is changing before our eyes. I mean, the trend was already there. It's just that COVID-19 kind of made it move a lot faster. It's going to be, the workforce is going to be more flexible. The whole traditional relationship of employer-employee is changing. And I guess, you know, if we talk about, you know, we are here at UQ and UQ Ventures. UQ Ventures is not just about starting new companies. It's actually, you know, UQ's attempt at providing students with more entrepreneurial skill set that is going to be required in almost any job out of university. You will need to possess those entrepreneurial skill set, because it will be required whether you start your own business or you work through different hats and all of those different things. So absolutely key and really important. But if I talk about entrepreneurs, I always say that the default state of any new venture is failure. And the entrepreneurs need to work absolutely day and night and harder than anything you've ever worked before to change that default state from failure to a success. And I think during these difficult times, I see that, you know, I definitely know about myself that I needed to immerse myself 100%. I could not wear a few different hats. I put all the other hats on ice for a while before I was able to kind of step back and say, hey, you know, and address some of the other passions I have personally and my personal development. So there is definitely a lot of flexibility that is required from all of us, and that is a trend that is increasing and will continue to increase. in the future.
Yeah, that's great. So look, I just wanted to share a couple of notes, some messages from our sponsors. So obviously this is a University of Queensland Business School series. We are, I'm not sure that's my first one. So we are going to be continuing these series for a little while yet. So really excited about around the next session we've got with Leanne Kemp, the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur. So Leanne's got a great story of her own startup and is now driving the Queensland government strategy around entrepreneurship. So don't miss that. Paul Birch is the Queensland Chief Scientist, so really behind trying to drive the science agenda and trying to see how we stimulate our economy, using world's best innovations. And then on the 26th of June, we're talking with Shay Quaver. So Shay's really interesting because she's a design anthropologist. She works with the Suncorp Bank to be able to try and make sure that when they develop products and services, they actually solve the right problem using ethnography and using observational skills. So Shay's a really interesting speaker and has some really very different ideas around how do you discover those insights. So please register for those workshops. And
if I can just add on that, I see that you have Leanne Kemp coming up. And Leanne Kemp, we are very, very fortunate in Queensland to have such a chief entrepreneur. She's, by the way, talking about the research that we've done before I started the company, I went and met Leanne for her advice early on back in 2013 as well. And she gave fantastic advice, and that was before she started her latest venture, because she's started so many different ventures, and she's one of the best advisors you'll ever meet. So absolutely recommending to join
awesome.
that session.
I didn't realize that, Rand. Thanks for the plug. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. So the other thing I'll just tell you about is the University of Queensland has got a whole range of online courses, and so some of them come from the MicroMasters in Corporate Innovation. So we've actually made some of those. Normally you pay for those. We've made a number of them at basically an admin cost of $8 each. So check out the website, some of those courses. And also just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up about a Masters of Leadership in Service Innovation, which we've recently launched, which is really about helping people understand, how do we embrace different technologies, things like AI, machine learning, using big data to be able to create competitive advantage. So this new Masters of Service Level Innovation is a new program which we've just recently launched. So I'd encourage you to think about that. But look, Rand, so appreciate your time. I know you're crazy busy running a company and entrepreneur residence in the UQ Ventures program. So very much appreciate your time. I've learned so much around what you've had to discover, that idea about keeping customer first, but realize that your first understanding of the problem isn't necessarily the exhausted understanding of that problem. The actual problems just keep coming, and success comes from continuing to be able to
Just not sure if this is still broadcasting, and what happened to Cameron. If people still see me, then I'd like to thank everyone for their time joining in, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I think there is the ability to put in the chat a few things. Feel free to post any questions if you have. Great, great question from Samantha here. If I could go back to the beginning, what advice would I give myself? the best advice is not to try and get everything perfect before I start, because the learning start when you start executing. The point of, I mean, research is important, but actually going and executing and trying things and trying to get that MVP and really thinking what an MVP is, because you really want to make sure that it's still viable, but it really is the minimum possible. So really important to go and do that, because no one has a fully fledged, even though we think we do, it never ends up that way. They're never coming fully formed. It's kind of one of those things that we got to keep doing and moving forward. And as we move forward, it's almost like we have the ability to look over the corner and see the next problem and the next realization that keeps evolving our ideas. So I think going back, Samantha, to your question, I would definitely tell myself to not sweat the little details and just move forward with MVPs and testing and going on and meeting the market with a product. Ray's asking to repeat the name of the book. The book is called Hooked, and it's by a Stanford professor called Nir Eyal. Nir is N-I-R and Eyal is E-Y-A-L. So a fantastic book called Hooked. How important is intellectual property for entrepreneurs? So Cameron, I just been answering questions while you were away.
Sorry, mate, I just totally dropped everything.
That's okay. That's okay. So how important is intellectual property for entrepreneurs? So what's important for entrepreneurs is to build competitive advantage, and competitive advantage can come in many different forms, and one of them is intellectual property, and that's important. When people talk about intellectual property, many times they talk about patents, but remembering that patents obviously really important in some areas, but remembering that this is not your first go-to for competitive advantage, because patents are really expensive. There are so many different ways to create competitive advantage for your business that you really want to think about it from the perspective of competitive advantage, not from the perspective of protecting intellectual property. Specifically on intellectual property, people always think patents, but I'd like to point that actually protecting your brand and trademarks. And if you're thinking of going global, think about how do you manage your trademarking globally. And yes, it costs a lot of money, but building something that then someone else can copy and copy your brand, that's a big risk that you wanna manage as entrepreneurs. So intellectual property is definitely important. You always need to consider it. Just don't think of it as only patents. Think about all the other elements that intellectual property encompasses.
Looks like there's another couple of questions up there.
Yeah.
Can you see them, Rain?
Yeah, I can. So the question is, as an entrepreneur, how important would you say is to have a growth or benefit mindset? What kind of traits would you say are imperative for entrepreneurs to embody to be successful? Great question from Rubik there. So absolutely, the key thing for entrepreneur is the ability to execute. Execute and learn, and keep executing and keep learning and then fixing, and the flexibility of it. So you want to be determined, but also flexible. You want to be very good at listening to other people's advice and not just always, like we have a human tendency always of kind of dismissing other people's ideas and say, well, I understand what you're saying, but this is why I'm right. We always like to justify why we are right, instead of actually, I'm speaking with someone, I only met that person for the first time, but let's assume, just take the point that he or she is very smart, and saying, if they think differently to me, actually analyzing why that is and what can we learn from it, rather than why can we dismiss it and why can we argue against it. So there is a point here of a good balance for an entrepreneur from one side to be determined, because we do see a dent in the universe that most people don't see, and we say, I can fix that, and in my dented universe, you know, that's how we should all be in the future. But also making sure that we truly listen to what other people say, and say, how can that improve my thinking and my plans and so forth. And beyond anything else, perseverance. Nothing is more important to an entrepreneur than perseverance, because the job of an entrepreneur is a never-ending problem solving. So it literally is, I think Cameron said it earlier on, you know, you think you're solving a problem, but then the next problem is always tougher and more complex than the previous one. And you stay on these problems, and you keep solving it and solving it and solving it, and you just keep at it. And as long as you're passionate about it, you just keep doing that. And that's I think makes it for a great entrepreneur.
All right, I think that's exhausted our questions. So, Ran, that's been awesome. I've really enjoyed that conversation, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the people who are listening in have learned a lot. So thanks again for your time, and again, look forward to catching up on campus when we're allowed to get back together again. So thanks for your time, and we'll see you around soon.